Good morning. Welcome to the Farm Field Trip Grant Information Session webinar for the 2017 grant that is currently open. If you're just joining us, you can download a copy of the PowerPoint slides in the handout section here. And if you're viewing a recording, we'll have the slides posted online on the website as well. My name is Erica Walther. I am the Farm to School Specialist here at OSSI, and I administer this Farm Field Trip Grant. So if you become a grantee, or you're interested in becoming a grantee, or you are working on Farm to School programming in DC, you either may know me or will definitely get to know me, and I'm excited for all the new folks we'll have on board. So a little bit of background information about why we do this grant and where it came out of. So farm field trips are a core component of teaching students about their local food system and a big piece of why we are promoting farm to school in the district. Farm field trips really allow for hands-on learning opportunities in a variety of different settings for children. One of the things that I really like about farm field trips is their ability to engage different types of learners. And so we all, as educators, are looking at students and trying to figure out the best way to get information into their heads, right? So we want to see if students who are visual learners versus learners who learn better by writing or doing or testing things out. And so farm field trips allow for all of these different kinds of students to learn. We created this grant, this is our third grant cycle, so two or 3 years ago, because speaking with a lot of teachers and a lot of school staff, one of the barriers to getting kids out to trips to local farms was finances, was money. And OSSI is able to provide that money, and so we created a grant program. The grant program is ever changing. We're always trying to find ways to make it easier on the schools. It is a smaller amount of money than many of our grants, and so that is something we're thinking about. So I just wanted to let you all know that. This grant is funded through the Healthy Schools Act. The Healthy Schools Act was passed in 2010 and is a piece of local legislation in DC that works on creating a healthier school environment for children and charges OSSI and a number of other government agencies and nonprofits with conducting programming to support that goal. So this year's grant is designed to support trips taken between November 2016 and September 2017. Now, the reason that might seem a little finicky to people, our fiscal year runs October 1st through September 30th, which doesn't really align with the school year and makes it a little bit hard for us to grant out money. So the way that I'm trying to do this year, and I would love feedback as we go through, is that you apply for the grant now. The applications are due at the end of September. We will let people know no later than the 1st of November who's being awarded, and you can plan for trips in November if it is still warm enough, or you're taking a trip that can be done in colder weather through the spring. And then you can use the funding over the summer, and if needed, you can use the funding that first month of school, the end of August and beginning of September, to take a trip. So if you really are intent on doing a fall trip, you can do it, but you'd have to wait a full school year. Because our fiscal year ends at the end of September, it's okay to have a grant that runs then. If at any point during this webinar you have a question, feel free to type a question into the question box, use the chat function, raise your hand, and we will get to them. All right, so the timeline. The grant period is going to be, like I said, November 1st, 2016 through September 30th, 2017. The RFA was released this past Monday, August 15th. The pre-application question period is going to end on September 16th. So that means if you have questions about anything at all about the grant, about how to use the EEMS system, about questions about what you cannot spend the money on, about what types of applications we're looking for, about who's been funded in the past, anything at all, you can call or email me and I will answer your question. I will also compile a list of all of the questions that we've received, and I will post those online by usually the following week so that people can view them. If you have a question between September 16th and September 30th, I really am not supposed to answer it. So please keep that in mind, that I really cannot answer questions past that September 16th deadline, and that's just an OSSI policy. Your applications will be due by 3 p.m. on September 30th. Because all of this is done through EGMS, which we will talk about, the 3 p.m. deadline is hard and fast. I can't do anything about it. If you're submitting at 2:59 and the system is really slow and it doesn't work and it denies your application because it goes through at 3:01, I can't fix that. So I highly suggest you submit early. And then awardees will be announced by November 1st, so we'll let everybody know. Okay, who can apply? So K-12 DC public school classes and public charter school classes are eligible to apply, as well as nonprofits that work with schools directly. They can apply either as a fiscal sponsor, which we'll talk about later, or as the actual implementing organization. So we love seeing community-based organizations, parent-teacher associations, and any other kind of organization that's working with the school. If you are a DC public school teacher or principal or business manager and you would like to apply for this grant, you must submit your application through the central office for DCPS. The RFA has the email in there and it gives you a timeline. They say they'd like it 2 weeks in advance. I would really suggest getting it in before that. So if you're interested and you're from a DCPS school, please reach out to central office. And that is their policy for who can have access to EGMS. The charter schools, each person at a charter school, there is a designated EGMS person usually, so check with your business manager or whoever deals with grants and they should know. And nonprofits, the same thing. Usually there's 1 or 2 people who are designated to have a login for EGMS. All right, EGMS. I keep saying this acronym. So EGMS is the Enterprise Grants Management System. We switched over to using this system about a year or 2 ago at OSSE, and it's essentially an online portal for submitting and managing grants. So you and I both see the same system. We accept all of our applications through EGMS now. So if you've applied for a grant with us, a couple of years ago and you did it through an Adobe PDF form, we're no longer accepting those applications. Like I said, each LEA has a designated person with access to EGMS, and then both the application and the central data section must be filled out for an application to be accepted. So you'll have to just go through and ensure that your central data section is filled out. If it's not, check with that main person who has the login to EGMS because that's usually information that they should be able to fill in. Also, please note that in order to be eligible for any Healthy Schools Act grant, you have to have submitted your most recent school health profile. So for this grant, that means that your school, your LEA, must have completed their 2015-2016 school health profile. I'm pretty sure we have an 100% rate for this past year and you should be fine, but just double check. And I will check all that. So when your application comes in, I'll get my list of who submitted their health profile and we'll go from there. So a couple things that I really want to stress on this webinar about creating an application and the applications that I've seen the last couple of years. So one thing that always comes up is the costs and the research. So I highly suggest that you do your research ahead of time so that you're putting in accurate information into your plan for the field trip and your budget for the field trip. And that just helps, gives the readers a better idea of what you're doing. It makes your application look stronger if you're organized and thoughtful, but also helps, should you be awarded, helps you kind of stay on track as you're going, helps with planning, and also will make it easier for you to submit reimbursement requests. You can alter your budget as you go through the grant, but it's a lot easier. I find it that schools have more success when they have done the work upfront ahead of time. So looking at what the real cost of the actual trip is, the bus transportation, and the follow-up supplies. So give a call to the farm that you want to go. Tell them when you're interested in coming, get a price quote. They may or may not hold the date for you, which might be nice. Same thing with the buses. Ask for a quote about how many kids you're transporting. And then, check Amazon, check your local store for where you're going to be buying your supplies from. Also, if you are not the teacher who's applying directly, but you're a nonprofit or you're the principal, really make sure that the teacher is a part of writing the application because they will be charged with a big portion of implementing the grant. Also, be descriptive and thorough, especially when you're explaining your follow-up activity. So the follow-up activity is the place where you really get to to design a program that is going to bolster what your students learned on the field trip and create some longevity in this type of programming in your school. So we want to give the reader who will be scoring your grant a clear understanding of what that follow-up activity looks like. A couple things that we see with EGMS that I did just want to talk about. Central data we mentioned, to make sure that that's filled out. The application is going to ask for two things: a SAM expiration date and a DUNS number, a Duns and Bradstreet number. Both of those your business manager should know. They have to be filled out in order to accept an application and in order for you to get paid. So really make sure that you're getting all that information compiled before you go to submit your application, so that you don't run into issues at the last minute. There's a required documentation section. For this grant, none of the documents listed are actually required because we just don't need them all. Some of the other grants need letters of support and proof of status as a nonprofit and all that kind of stuff. So we don't require that. But I will say up front, it's best practice for you to upload a W-2 and a master collection form, both of which you can download if needed from the Farm Field Trip Grant Application website on our page. But that helps us, should you be awarded, get you into our system quicker and allow to get your grant up and running quicker. Please note, EGMS does not accept any special characters of any kind. So if you're typing and you're going to use percentages or and signs or pound signs, none of that is going to be accepted. So just spell out things. And the EGMS system is really great in terms of managing grants, keeping everything in one place. It's really good for you as a grantee so that all your OSSI grants are in the same place. But it's an online system, always going to have its kinks. EGMS can be a little bit slow. It tends to be faster on your end than actually on our end at OSSI. But I just encourage you to start early. It's not the most user-friendly for some people, and so just get yourself into the system, get familiar with it, figure out what you need, and then start planning your application. All right, there are a couple of requirements of the grant that I want to make sure you're aware of as you're reading through the RFA. So you must take one field trip to a farm within 80 miles of the district, and you have to complete one follow-up activity within 90 days of your field trip back at your school. We require that your funding is allocated in certain ways, so we set like a threshold. So for your field trip, you can spend up to 70% of your funding on your field trip. That means you can spend anywhere from 10% of your funding to 70% of your funding on your field trip. For your follow-up activity, it has to be at least 30% of your funding. So that means you can spend anywhere from 30% to 90% of your funding on your follow-up activity. So if you're going to a farm in the district and they're giving you a reduced rate because maybe you have a number of students you have a high free and reduced meal rate, and it's only costing you $100 or $200 to go on the field trip, you can spend the remainder of that money on your follow-up activity. You're required to administer an evaluation packet to all your students, so that'll get mailed out to you. We do some sort of pre and post test packet. We might change it a little bit for this coming year to make it simpler on you guys. You'll have to submit then 2 one-page summaries. One is of the field trip, so feel free to include pictures on there. Just a one-page typed easy summary of what you did on the field trip, what your students did, written by you. You're welcome to include excerpts from your students as well. And then you'll also want to submit a one-page summary of the follow-up activity so that we know exactly what happened on that trip, back at the school, and that it was done and when. And again, feel free to include pictures. Funding restrictions. So this grant has a couple restrictions. The things that are allowed: transportation to and from the farm, the cost of the field trip is designated by the farm, so what they're charging you, supplies and materials for the follow-up activity, and food for approved uses in accordance with the language set forth in the RFA. So there are some details in the RFA about if you're doing snacks or things for children, they have to meet certain guidelines. If you would like to buy lunch at the farm, that's okay. If they're serving farm-created meals, they're serving a burger, let's say, with grass-fed beef and a salad on the side from their produce, that's okay. We don't want you, stopping for fast food or buying lunches elsewhere, because you can get bagged lunches from your school lunch program. What's not allowable is paying extra chaperones or covering staff time. So you can't pay for extra teachers. You can't pay for extra nonprofit staff to go on this trip. And we don't want you purchasing souvenirs while on the trip. So just thinking about where your money is going. All right, so how do I choose a farm when I'm going through this application process? So select a farm that will provide the right experience for your students personally. So think about your kids. How old are they? How many students are you taking? Have you taken them on a field trip before, and do they do well with just a short field trip, 30 minutes, or can they handle a 2-hour tour around a farm? What have they experienced before? Have they been on a farm field trip? Do you want to take them to somewhere that they can experience something new? So if the first trip they went on, they only saw produce, maybe they should go to a farm where there is cattle or there are chickens or there are pigs, so they can see a different point of view from a different kind of farmer. Or maybe you took them to a trip in Virginia and now you want to take them to a trip in Maryland. So really think about what farm you're going to and why you're choosing that farm. And again, I am happy to help you work through that and figure out which farm is right for you. Also, make sure you're selecting a farm that fits with your curriculum. So a number of our farms are aligned with standards. A number of them will tailor their trips to a certain subject matter. So if you're learning about cultural foods, or you're learning about what used to grow in this region in the 1800s, or you're focusing on a math lesson where there's a lot of counting involved, talk to the farmer who you're scheduling the trip with about that, and they usually are very happy to tie in some of those lessons. We really suggest that you visit the OSSI Farm to School Farm Field Trip webpage. They have a lot of information about different farms up there. There's some additional information that will be posted in the next week or two that'll have video trailers of some of the farms and more places that you can go visit, and we're always growing that list. So planning your follow-up activity. You want to make sure that your follow-up activity is really aligned with the lessons that were learned on the farm and what your students are learning in the classroom. So this farm field trip grant program should be pretty cohesive in terms of everything fitting together. So what's going on in your classroom with what's going on that they learned on the farm, and then tying it back to the students and in your classroom. Make sure you're maximizing your funding by purchasing a mix of items. And it's always great to focus your items on that are reusable, so that you can reuse them during the year after the grant period is done, or you can use them year to year. You can use them with another class. We definitely want you to be creative. Every year there's a new type of field trip that we see, or a new kind of follow-up activity that we see. So get a little crazy and think about what you can be doing for your students that's really out of the realm of possibility without this funding. Buying curriculum, buying cooking kits, those are always things that we love to see for sure. But if you have something that's different, feel free to shoot me an email and ask me about it. And I'll tell you if that's not something we are going to fund, or if it sounds really great and I'd love to test it out and we can see how it works. Also, go above and beyond. So you can engage more than just your students who attend the trip. So think about how your trip is going to affect maybe other classes at the school. And will your follow-up activity affect those students? Are there parent volunteers that are going to come with you, and how can they be engaged? How can you engage your larger community during the field trip or during the follow-up activity? All right, there's a couple issues that I see. So the biggest issue I see year to year is schools that don't plan ahead, and then the students end up missing out on taking this really fun field trip, or they miss out on doing their follow-up activity. So the onus is on you, the grantee, to make sure that you're planning. So we talked before about budget. So make sure that budget is how you want it to look when you submit your application. If we have to make changes through the grant period, we will, and we'll work together to do that. But make sure you have a plan, and that way your plan is easier to follow. Print it out. Make sure that you know what time of year things are going to get bought and when you're going to submit your reimbursement request, so you don't miss any of those deadlines. Definitely book your trip and your bus reservations early. So as soon as you get awarded your funding, go book your trip, because that is where we see a lot of issues come in, is that schools had called ahead of time, they got the price quote, they said, I'm going to go visit this farm, it's going to cost me this much money, and I'm going to go on this date. Well, then they waited until 3 weeks before the date to call back, and that date was already taken because they needed a deposit. So make sure you're calling early. Buy your materials ahead of time. There's no saying that you can't order your materials for your follow-up activity, within the first month or two that you've been awarded your grant, and then make sure you're getting reimbursed for it and do that quickly so you're not waiting until the end of the grant period. I have about a couple of weeks left of when schools can submit reimbursement for this year's grant, and I have a number of schools that I have not received any reimbursement requests from, and I'm afraid they're not going to get them in on time. So I don't want that to happen to future grantees. Also, utilize your community organizations, your parent groups, the volunteers that come to your school to help you implement this grant. So maybe you have this great follow-up activity, but it's a little bit daunting and you feel like you're going to need some extra help. Can your PTA help? Is there a nonprofit working in your school that can support you? Are there other teachers that would like to get in on this and could bring their students, but you could work together? Think about ways to really get everyone involved. Those are the main things. The one thing that I realized is not in here that people might have questions about is the scoring criteria. It's pretty well laid out. It is in the RFA, and you can see in page 12, you'll see the application narrative and the questions that you'll be asked. And then you'll also be able to see the criteria that they'll be scored on when you log into EEMS. It's all there, so it's very transparent. You can see what you're going to be scored on, and I will say we want to fund you guys. That is where we want the money to go. I want it to be out with the students, with the schools, doing wonderful programming. So as long as you take the time to do your research, put in the application on time, the right folks are involved, you're descriptive enough that we can really tell what your program is going to be. We have $40,000, and the past 2 years we have not spent it all. So please submit applications. We would love to see more applications coming our way. We will fund multiple applications from one LEA, and definitely from one school. So if you are a teacher and you're a kindergarten teacher and you know the fifth grade teacher is also submitting an application from your same school, don't let that stop you. You can still submit, and if they're both good, we'll fund both of them, because then that's two groups of students from your school. And maybe you can do your follow-up activities together. There's a lot of creative ways to do this. So I am going to hang on for just a couple more minutes in case we have any questions. And then this webinar will also be posted online for those who would like to view it at another time, or if you have questions and would like to view it again. My email is down here at the bottom. Please feel free to email me. My phone number is on the website as well. I am available. I love talking about farm field trips. I would love to talk to anybody who is interested in submitting an application or taking a trip. And as long as you get the questions to me before that September 16th deadline, we should be able to have those conversations. So I hope you have a great day. And if you have no questions, you're free to exit the webinar at this time. Thank you.